We have some updates from Israel and Palestine to get to. The Israeli military says it has killed 9,000 Hamas fighters and has degraded the group's capabilities since October 7th. But officials told the Washington Post that Israeli defense forces say these gains could be threatened by the government's lack of a post-war strategy, according to the Post. Israel says it is moving away from large-scale bombardments and toward targeted raids.
24 Israeli soldiers were killed during fighting in Gaza on Monday, per the IDF, the Israeli military's deadliest day since the fighting renewed after October 7th. The IDF says most of the soldiers were killed in a terrorist blast while, quote, clearing out a buffer zone. They were setting charges to blow up residential housing. The IDF charges were then ignited by an RPG, killing over 20 soldiers. On Tuesday, John Kirby criticized Israel's plan for a buffer zone in Gaza, saying the plan goes against the Biden administration's policy, saying, quote, "We do not want to see the territory of Gaza reduced in any way. We won't support that." Meanwhile, medical personnel in Gaza say at least 40 Palestinians were killed in Khan Yunis yesterday, which was once designated a safe space for Palestinian evacuees. Al Jazeera reports that Nasser Hospital has come under fire as Israeli forces push to encircle the city, creating brutal conditions for medical workers and threatening to knock out one of Gaza's few remaining functional hospitals. Yesterday, displaced Gazans protest the lack of humanitarian aid entering the Strip and demanded an immediate ceasefire and return to their homes. Meanwhile, stateside, the Democratic Majority for Israel PAC is trying to stop New Hampshire, the state of New Hampshire, from even tallying write-in votes cast for a ceasefire. Yeah, there's a lot going on here. In a clip that we can't show because we don't have the rights to it, there was a protest around all of the aid trucks that are lined up outside of Gaza, unable to get in, of some Israelis protesting the idea that they would come in. This is obviously a contentious issue. And the large Israeli, the IDF death toll, the largest of the conflict for Israel so far, has come under some scrutiny and been subject to some controversy because the 20-plus soldiers that were killed were laying these charges in residential housing, and that an RPG set off their own charges, and that's what ended up killing the IDF soldiers. So there was this question now brought into focus of whether or not the act of blowing up residential housing, setting charges, walking away, and just doing demolition on houses is one well tailored to actually targeting Hamas. If you're in a house, you're laying charges, is there really a strong argument that Hamas are lying in wait in the basement or in tunnels? And two, whether or not the practice of clearing a buffer zone, which Israel has now admitted to, is conducive with international law, and whether it's a flagrant kind of thumbing the nose at what Americans have said their political objective, their broader objectives are in Gaza, which is not to decrease the land size of Gaza and allow more kind of territorial expansion of Israel into the occupied territory.
Yeah, it again shows that Israel is going to go its own way, has its own plan. The Netanyahu government is committed to doing what it's doing, even as American officials are increasingly dissatisfied with the approach and wanting not to create a buffer zone, rejecting some of the rhetoric that Netanyahu has used, specifically saying there will not be a two-state solution. That is abjectly contrary to what President Biden's position on the conflict is. But we continue to offer unqualified support, and it doesn't seem to phase Netanyahu at all that we're upset he's going to continue doing what he's doing, and we have no ability to change his mind or grapple with the situation.
Well, we do. We could stop providing the bombs that are being dropped on Gaza and stop providing the $3.5 billion worth of funding.
Yes, but the Biden administration is not willing to do that, it seems.
Right, but it has the ability to do it. It's a really important distinction there, because everything that is happening is done with the Biden administration's tacit approval, explicit approval, if you really want to read into it, because it could not be done without America's support, not just its literal support in terms of financing and bombs, but also the cover that the United States is giving to Israel in the international stage, in the UN, with its vetoes of any kind of investigation, of a ceasefire, all of the kinds of resolutions that have come before the UN in the last 3 months. It's also worth picking up on, I think, something interesting that we said in our read here, that Israel is saying that it's moving away from large-scale bombardments and toward targeted raids. again, this is a kind of an admission that what they were doing was non-targeted before, and raises some questions that are before the ICJ right now, as to whether or not what Israel is doing has ever been, during the course of this campaign, targeted to get Hamas, or whether or not it's a broader bombardment that's intended to do something along the lines of ethnic cleansing and or genocide, especially when you look at the enormously disproportional Hamas combatant to civilian kill ratios, and of course the ongoing accusations of collective punishment with denying the aid, the medical supplies, the water, the food, et cetera, to the region.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to note about the targeted raids involving people is they're actually more dangerous for the Israeli soldiers, as well, as this shows, the greatest day of violence for the IDF forces. Going in, actually mobilizing ground troops, doing door-to-door maneuvers with actual soldiers risks their lives. So they're going to have to,
But to be clear, loss of life is tragic, but 24, the front page news is that 24 IDF soldiers were killed by their own explosives. To be clear, they weren't engaged in any armed combat. They were killed by the explosives they were setting to use to blow up residential housing in Gaza. But also that 250 odd Palestinians are killed every single day in Gaza, and those lives are considered to be kind of grandfathered in. In fact, we have a clip of a particularly galling clip of a 51-year-old man waving a white flag. He had just finished conducting an interview with ITV, said he was going to try to rescue his family members and to evacuate them in Yan Kounis. His name was Ramzi Abu Shalul. He was a 51-year-old clothes seller. After, we're going to see this in a clip, after he finishes conducting this interview, turns and walks away waving a white flag to go get his family members. And you see him gunned down, seemingly just in cold blood, by the IDF. Let's take a look.
Members and get them out of harm's way.
عند الحجة واخويا وعنده حوالي 50 نازح او 70 نازح موجودين في البيت الثاني اللي يخش علينا لو طلعونا واخويا ما طلعوش بدنا نروح يعني نطلع ان شاء الله.
The interview complete, our cameraman walked away. And then this happened.
Now, British outlet The Independent covered this and spoke to a human rights lawyer named Michael Mansfield, who said the footage was compelling evidence of a war crime, saying, quote, "This group of 5 people are unarmed. They didn't have weapons of any kind. They are waving a white flag. They do not present a threat. So to shoot them without warning just like that, it is an execution." And keep in mind that Bernie tried to pass a resolution just to look into the idea of whether or not Israel is committing war crimes with money that the U.S. is sending them. A bipartisan vote of Congress struck that down. Meanwhile, Americans are seeing footage like this. I think that largely explains why the desire for a ceasefire is so high in the United States, and why, frankly, it's really a political albatross for Joe Biden.
I want to pick back up on something you said a few minutes ago. I mean, they were the Israeli soldiers who were killed. They didn't accidentally light their own explosives and blow themselves up. They were in a firefight. They were fighting Gazan militants that struck the explosives.
Their explosives, and it caused the building to collapse on them. Yeah.
Right. So they're combat deaths, which was my point, that sending in ground troops is increasingly dangerous for the soldiers as well, and Israel might want to take that into consideration.
They have been taking that into consideration. I think that's why they've been doing all of these bombardments, which preserve Israeli life. And if you think that preserving Israeli life is more important than not killing tens of thousands of innocent civilians.
I think preserving both lives is important, and that's why a ceasefire would be great, and we would love for that to happen. And Israel has offered to end the war immediately if the senior leadership of Hamas goes into exile, surrenders, including the organizer of the October 7th attack. So it's on them for refusing to do that. And every death that happens as they wait that out is their fault.
You've been very clear on that position, and I think it's an immoral one, but we'll continue to disagree about that going forward. More Rising for you after this.